Hello and welcome to Tech 24 on France 24. I'm Shona Bhattacharya. Coming up in this week's show, how do news organizations, artists, and musicians get paid on the internet? When you go through big companies like Google or YouTube, they usually don't. The new copyright directive from the European Parliament hopes to change that. Luxembourg is the latest country to join the space race. It'll fund companies 100 million euros to notably develop space mining. We'll be speaking to iSpace, a private company that hopes to tap into that fund to set up colonies on the moon. In the age of the internet, who gets paid, when, and by whom? Questions companies and content creators have around the world. But here in Europe, lawmakers may be onto a solution. The European Parliament approved the copyright directive that still needs to be finalized, but if it does see the day in the next few months, it could revolutionize the way web companies distribute their cash, or for those against the directive, it could stifle creation. Anka Ula tells us more.
Il voto è chiuso.
A resounding victory in the European Parliament for what could become the first major disruption to EU copyright law in more than 15 years. 438 MEPs approved the new version of the EU's copyright directive.
This is a good sign for the creative industries in Europe.
The draft legislation was originally rejected in July, following criticism of two provisions. Article 11 requires online platforms like Google and Facebook to pay media companies when linking to their content, often referred to as a link tax. This article has been hailed by traditional media outlets, including news agency Agence France Presse, as a crucial source of revenue.
Of course we believe in the continuation of Facebook and Google. Just let them pay us. That's all we're asking, that they pay us so that we can continue and develop the news.
But opponents say it would limit the free flow of information and reduce traffic to news sites from aggregators like Google News. Article 13 is often referred to as the upload filter, because it would require platforms to check all content before it's uploaded and filter out copyrighted material, or else pay a fine. This provision split the entertainment industry down the middle. Supporters argue the directive protects content creators, while opponents say it stifles innovation and creativity. The draft legislation still has a long way to go before it becomes law. A final vote before the EU Parliament is scheduled for January. If approved, each EU member state would then have to implement it.
For more on this story, our on-set expert Dhananjay Kandalkar is with us. Welcome, Dhananjay. How will these provisions impact the average internet user?
Well, for an average user, sharing content is going to be a bit different. That's because of this so-called upload filtering clause. So before the content is actually uploaded, the entire content will be screened. And even after it's screened, there's no guarantee that all of it will get uploaded, because some of it may get pulled down. So that's one thing. And second thing, it relates to the news aggregator sites. So for example, the other clause, which has been hotly debated, talks about the right of publishers to demand a fee from internet platforms. Now, depending on the kind of agreement the publishers and the internet platforms have, you may or may not be able to see sites or the links of certain sites. So that's going to be a big change as well.
All right, thanks for that, Dhananjay. Moving on now, Luxembourg has launched the Luxembourg Space Agency, and it's not your average national space agency. Dhananjay, tell us more. What does this one hope to achieve?
Well, Shona, unlike NASA or the European Space Agency, the Luxembourg Space Agency won't be sending missions to the moon, or they won't be indulging in expensive space exploration missions, but instead their focus is solely on developing business activities in space, specifically to space mining. Now, space mining involves extracting resources from near-Earth objects like the moon or asteroids. Now, this is the latest in a series of initiatives that Luxembourg has taken recently, which includes passing a law that gives private companies rights to resources mined from bodies like asteroids, and also launching of a fund that will help, or that Luxembourg will invest in space technology startups.
There are already 10 space mining companies registered in Luxembourg, and one of which is Japanese company iSpace that aims to send missions to the moon to extract minerals and water. To talk more about it, we're joined now from Luxembourg by Kyle Asierno, who is the managing director for iSpace's European operations. Thank you so much for joining us on Tech24. Tell us, Kyle, why did iSpace choose Luxembourg as its European base?
Thank you very much for having me. So we decided to choose Luxembourg for our European base because the government in Luxembourg is very small and accessible. They provided over 200 million euros in financial support for companies doing research and development. And of course, they developed this very progressive legislation that you mentioned before, whereby companies are able to sell the resources that they find on the lunar surface.
Now, Kyle, one of your missions is to set up colonies on the moon and extract minerals from the lunar surface. Which minerals are you hoping to find there?
So for us right now, the most important resource is water. Scientists have found about 6 billion tons of lunar ice stored at the poles. And we want to use this water ice for rocket fuel in the future.
And how will that be?
So currently, rockets don't use gasoline or diesel. They use liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. So our mission is to get to the lunar poles to find out more about the availability of water ice, and then eventually use that water ice so that it can be sold to companies to further their missions deeper into space.
Kyle, space exploration until now has generally been the domain of big government space agencies, and we have some private players that are coming in, some large-scale players that are also trying to get into that area. But can private companies sustain themselves in this expensive and technologically challenging future?
Yeah, it's really amazing. You know, at this point, there's only 3 countries that have landed on the moon: the Americans, the Russians, and the Chinese. And we're at an interesting point in history where the cost of components have went down so little that we can actually afford, a private company like iSpace can afford to do their own missions. But of course, we intend to collaborate closely with space agencies and mutually benefit from the low-cost missions that we can do, and of course, the experience that they've gained over the past 60 years of space exploration.
Thanks again, Kyle Asierno, for agreeing to speak to us on Tech24. And now it's time for the test part of our show. And today we're looking at technologies that fight one of the most impressive forms of pollution today, plastic. In the oceans, in our landfills, now a number of initiatives are hoping to find ways to either pick it out of the ocean or reuse it altogether. First, we have the pavé, a kind of flooring made of plastic waste and developed by the French company SAS Minimum. Dan and Jake, you can tell us what it's about.
Well, I have this plastic tile in my hand. It's made of recycled plastic. It comes in different colors depending on the kind of plastic that's recycled. Now, this company was founded by 3 youngsters in Paris, and in just 6 months, they have recycled 2 tons of plastic. Now, the reason why they chose flooring tiles is very interesting because they wanted to make a product that lasts longer and it is not disposed of easily, so the plastic doesn't get back into the environment.
So they
in a short
decided
time.
to make it into construction material.
Absolutely. Now, they already have tie-ups with a number of shops in Paris, including Galeries Lafayette, and they intend to increase their capability of recycling. And interestingly, they're also working with organizations that help plastic collectors. You know, they sustain the plastic collectors basically. So the plastic collectors in developing countries, they get money from their occupation. So that's the history, and that's the project of SAS Minimum regarding pavé.
There's another project that we'd like to talk about today, and it's about a boat that's trying to actually physically pick up the pieces of plastic that are floating around in the ocean?
It's called the Ocean Cleanup Project. The target area is the so-called Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is located in the northern part of the Pacific Ocean and which has 80,000 metric tons of plastic floating around. So this 600-meter boom will be deployed there. It is powered by waves and winds, and it turns into a U shape with 10 feet net underneath it, and it collects the plastic as moves into it. It's kind of an artificial shoreline. And once there's enough plastic collected, smaller boats come and pick up the plastic, and the plastic is then recycled.
The plastic is recycled. That's always the question. What do you do then with all the plastic that you're taking out
It's
of the
recycled and
ocean?
reused.
Thank you, Dhananjay, and thank you for watching. That's it for this edition of Tech 24. Do stay tuned. There's more news coming up, or if you want more of us, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. Stay with us.